Greetings, this is Griff Ruby with part 73 of my series, Dogmatic Theology, Volume 2, Christ Church by Msgr G. Van Noort, Ecclesiology for Sedevacantists. We now pick up the conclusion on the marks of the Church, page 206. It has been proven that the Roman Catholic Church tradition, which exists as traditional Catholicism today, alone is that church which God founded through his only begotten Son and endowed with obvious marks of its divine origin. Actually, the Catholic Church does stand out with obvious marks. Those who have even a fair amount of education realize that it is far more ancient than all other Christian societies, and that it is the mighty tree whose lopped off branches these societies are. Finally, it is almost impossible for anyone to live among good Catholics and not to glimpse at least some manifestation of the holiness of the Catholic Church. Who, for example, among our non-Catholic countrymen, does not realize that Catholic priests usually exhibit a strikingly different care for the sick and the dying than Protestant ministers, even though many of the latter are fine, upright men? Which of them has never marveled at the modesty, self-denial, and charity exhibited to the sick by our hospital nuns? Abraham Lincoln, for example, wrote this moving tribute in his Civil War diary. Of all forms of charity and benevolence seen in the crowded wards and the hospitals, those of some Catholic sisters were among the most efficient. I never knew whence they came or what was the name of their order. More lovely than anything I have ever seen in art are the pictures that remain of those modest sisters going on their errands of mercy among the suffering and the dying, gentle and womanly, yet with the courage of soldiers leading a forlorn hope to sustain them in that contact with such horrors. As they went from cot to cot, they were venerable angels of mercy. Thus it is that nearly all men, educated and uneducated alike, perceive something in the Catholic Church which they cannot help admiring and cannot help realizing is lacking in their own sects. In a word, nearly all of them are struck and amazed by at least some one ray of Catholic truth. Why is it, then, that many of them, whose sincerity cannot be doubted, fail to arrive at an acknowledgment of the truth? Because the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not lay hold of it. Because, that is to say, they are enveloped by so many and such great prejudices that a suspicion that the Catholic Church is true and only Church of Christ can hardly arise in their minds. Such prejudices, it seems, can be dispelled from the minds only very gradually, and without their being conscious of the fact. But those prejudices vanish the more quickly, the more Catholics, both in their private and public lives, unconsciously exhibit religion, charity, and tranquility. They vanish the more quickly, the more priests are resplendent in moderation, chastity, devotedness, and a prudent but tireless zeal. Those prejudices vanish more quickly, the more diligently and fully Catholic doctrine is explained in both oral instruction and popular writing. And above all, the more frequently and fervently all Catholics pour forth prayer to the Father of lights to snatch away the veil that covers the hearts of those in error. So, they had an interesting example of popular writing. See, for example, the excellent little series of pamphlets issued by the Knights of Columbus and designed solely to refute the caricatures of Catholic doctrine so often accepted in all innocence by non-Catholics as though it were genuine Catholic doctrine. Now, I'd like to spend a little time on something else here. Some of these footnotes kind of struck me as intriguing. In talking about the, Luther and some of these others and so forth. See, for example, this is back on 192, there's a footnote here. See, for example, the descriptions of Luther and Calvin by Paul Hutchinson himself, a Protestant. Martin Luther was a great bull of a man, bursting with animal spirits, whose sermons and tracts seemed to erupt from him with an undamnable flood. His voice could summon to spiritual battle with a power that still reaches across the years as one reads his greatest writings. In his home, sitting at his table, drinking good Wittenberg beer, while he regaled his innumerable guests with the table talk that still makes good reading, playing his flute in the orchestra he formed with his children, visiting like a good pastor the sick and the poor. This is a Luther of infinite fascination. But there was another Luther, also a full-fledged German, a Luther who could flame into towering rages, who could vilify his opponents with a disgraceful abuse dredged up from the gutter, who could command the princes who had protected him to crush with unbridled ferocity the social uprising of what he called the murderous and thieving rabble of the peasants. The other father of the Reformation was about as different from Luther as a mortal could be. John Calvin was a wispy French intellectual with an introspective, syllogistic mind like that of Thomas Aquinas. Calvin's great contribution was to reduce the Protestant revolt to theological coherence. But the figure of Calvin himself remains cool, remote, and is repellent of familiarity as the living man. When accosted on a Geneva street by an enthusiastic refugee as Brother Calvin, he frostily answered that he was correctly addressed as Monsieur. So that's kind of an interesting one. Then there was another quote from the footnotes here to the overall chapter, and I'm going to go straight to one that particularly caught my eye. And it starts on about page 208 here, about missions. It's kind of interesting. And this is from a few testimonies by non-Catholic authors. Santon, a pastor of the Reformed Church, wrote the year 1880. There's no reason to wonder when Protestantism, with such enormous sums of money, sends forth in every direction, not only to the pagans, but also to France, Italy, Austria, Spain, and especially to the Far East, its emissaries, its itinerant preachers, its Bible salesmen, who have honeyed tongues and money-filled hands. If poor Catholics and schismatics, oppressed by bitter want, often allow themselves to be converted to Protestant beliefs, the real cause for wonder is that they obtain such meager results among the pagans. The Anglican canon Taylor wrote in 1888, "I believe our methods are not only unsuccessful but altogether wrong." Von Weizmann, German commissar in Africa, felt constrained to lavish the highest praise on the good works, the Christ-like influence, the culture and morality promoting efforts of the self-sacrificing and indefatigably working Catholic missionaries. While he extolled the latter as pillars of civilization, he stated without reservation that the English and German Protestant missionaries actually made his work more difficult and obstructed it, so that the great sums expended on Protestant missionary work here were in fact thrown away, and further that these people have, by reason of their political agitation, been more of a hindrance than a help. Elman Pacha wrote in the year 1890, "There's a peculiar contrast between the Catholic and Protestant English missions here in East Africa. In the case of the former, the Catholic ones, there is a lack of means and personnel. In fact, real need. Sounds like traditional groups today. We don't have much in the way of means. We just have our spirituality. In the case of the latter, abundance of money and men, in fact, overabundance. In the case of the former, hard work and earnest striving to educate their pupils in useful, purposeful living. In the case of the latter, psalm singing and the eye-rolling of complacent self-sufficiency. Much might be said on this subject." And that same contrast also now exists. The traditional Catholics, it's the same. We got just ourselves and not much else, really showing people how to live. The Novus Ordo, it's got money. The world gives it tons of money because they're popular. And, they're buying their way through. So, with this, I completed the first major section on the entire book, which was basically the church as a whole. The second part we will start in part 74. Section 2 is the church viewed from inside dogma. Thank you.